Suzanne Summers rebuilt her career on her own terms more than once, proving that reinvention isn't a last resort. It's a strategy. These are the legends with sealed legacies. Steve Harwell put a song in every road trip playlist for a generation. Betty White spent over 80 years in show business and never once let Hollywood define her ceiling. Elvis Presley didn't just sell records. He rewired what it meant to be a cultural force, and the world is still feeling that current. Matthew Perry made the whole world laugh, and the grief when we lost him reminded us how deeply a performer can become part of people's lives. Loretta Lynn turned a hard Kentucky life into a catalogue that outlasted every trend that tried to replace her. Picture the Shrine Auditorium on the night of March 28th, 1994. Leonardo DiCaprio is 19 years old, wearing a dark suit that looks slightly too formal for his age. He has just been nominated for a Screen Actors Guild consideration cycle after What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and the industry has already started circling him the way it circles the rare ones, quietly, hungrily, before the noise starts. That night was a preview of a question that would follow him for 2 more decades. What does it take to build a legacy that outlasts the hype that created it? DiCaprio chose the hardest possible answer. He made people wait. The thing that separates Leonardo DiCaprio from almost every actor of his generation is not the Titanic money, or the Oscar, or the environmental advocacy. It is the deliberate, almost ruthless architecture of a career built on refusal. He turned down Robin in Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever. He walked away from Speed. He passed on Boogie Nights. Each refusal was a bet that his leverage would compound if he stayed selective. And each bet paid. When you trace the choices backward, a design emerges that looks less like luck and more like a long-game strategy that very few 20-somethings in Hollywood history have managed to execute with that kind of discipline. The documentary evidence of his impact starts in the casting rooms. After What's Eating Gilbert Grape in 1993, a performance for which he received an Academy Award nomination at age 19, becoming one of the youngest Best Supporting Actor nominees in Oscar history, directors began rerouting projects toward him. Robert De Niro, who co-starred in This Boy's Life that same year, later described DiCaprio as someone who arrived on set already knowing things that most actors spend a decade learning. That is not a vague compliment from a colleague. De Niro is famously sparing with that kind of language. The Titanic chapter is impossible to skip, not because of the box office record, though $2.19 billion in its original 1997 release, making it the highest-grossing film in history at that time, is a number worth sitting with. But because of what DiCaprio did immediately after. The machinery of franchise stardom was right there. Studios were building offers around his face. The rational career move, by every conventional Hollywood metric, was to consolidate the Titanic audience and ride it into 3 more event films. He did the opposite. He waited 4 years and came back with Gangs of New York, a brutal, unglamorous Martin Scorsese period film in which he played a revenge-driven street fighter named Amsterdam Vallon, alongside Daniel Day-Lewis. Critics, who had written him off as a teen idol, had to recalibrate. The Titanic detour, it turned out, had been the exception. The Scorsese collaboration was the plan. That partnership with Martin Scorsese represents one of the most documented actor-director relationships in modern cinema. From Gangs of New York in 2002, through The Aviator in 2004, The Departed in 2006, Shutter Island in 2010, The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013, and Killers of the Flower Moon in 2023, DiCaprio has functioned as Scorsese's primary dramatic instrument across 6 films spanning more than 2 decades. The Aviator earned DiCaprio his second Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The Wolf of Wall Street pushed both of them into commercially and critically contested territory. A 3-hour portrait of financial excess, so deliberately uncomfortable that it sparked a genuine public debate about whether the film was a critique or a celebration. That debate was itself a sign of impact. Films that produce no argument produce no change. The Departed is worth pausing on, specifically because of what it did to the ensemble film structure. DiCaprio's performance as Billy Costigan, an undercover cop fracturing under the psychological pressure of dual identity, was layered into a cast that included Jack Nicholson, Matt Damon, Mark Wahlberg, Alec Baldwin, and Martin Sheen. He was not the loudest presence in that film, he was the emotional center of it, and the restraint required to hold that position inside that much competing gravity is a technical achievement that acting schools still use as a reference point. Mark Wahlberg, who received an Oscar nomination for his supporting role in that film, has spoken in interviews about how DiCaprio's commitment on set recalibrated the energy of every scene he was in. The Academy Award conversation is its own chapter, and it matters not as a vanity metric, but as a document of how long the industry resisted formally acknowledging what was already obvious. DiCaprio was nominated for Best Actor for The Aviator in 2005, for Blood Diamond in 2007, and for The Wolf of Wall Street in 2014, before finally winning for The Revenant in 2016. The Internet's fixation on the 22-year wait between his first nomination and his win turned into a cultural phenomenon. Memes, think pieces, betting markets. But underneath the noise was a real observation. Here was an actor producing work that by any technical standard deserved recognition, being repeatedly passed over in a system that famously rewards sentiment and narrative as much as craft. When he finally won, the applause in the Dolby Theatre ran long enough that the broadcast had to hold. The Revenant itself is a case study in physical commitment to a role. Directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu, the film required DiCaprio to spend months filming in remote locations in Canada and Argentina, shooting in natural light only, submerging himself in frozen rivers and eating raw bison liver on camera, a detail that became shorthand for a certain kind of actor dedication that had previously been associated mainly with Daniel Day-Lewis. González Iñárritu has described DiCaprio as someone who engages with the physical reality of a role the way a method architect might engage with an actual building site. Not as performance research, but as structural necessity. Away from Scorsese, the range of directors DiCaprio has chosen to work with reads like a map of serious cinema over the last 30 years. Steven Spielberg cast him in Catch Me If You Can in 2002. Ridley Scott cast him in Body of Lies in 2008. Quentin Tarantino cast him as the villain Calvin Candie in Django Unchained in 2012, a role so precisely calibrated to subvert DiCaprio's heroic screen image that it became one of the most discussed casting choices of that decade, and then brought him back for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019, where he played Rick Dalton, a fading television actor wrestling with irrelevance in late 1960s Los Angeles. The Tarantino films together form an interesting through line. DiCaprio choosing roles that interrogate or complicate the idea of stardom itself, playing men who are either monstrous or diminished, rarely triumphant. Django Unchained introduced DiCaprio to a new generation of viewers who knew him primarily from Titanic, and the performance, cold, witty, physically unsettling, shifted how that generation understood his range. Jamie Foxx, who played the title character, noted in press for the film that DiCaprio went to places in his portrayal of Candie that made the entire cast uncomfortable in productive ways. That is the kind of on-set detail that circulates in the industry and shapes how directors think about what a particular actor is willing to risk. The environmental work is not incidental to the career. DiCaprio founded the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation in 1998, 1 year after Titanic, when he was 23 years old, and could have spent that capital on almost anything else. The foundation has since distributed more than $100 million in grants to projects focused on biodiversity, ocean conservation, and climate advocacy. He produced and narrated the documentary Before the Flood in 2016, directed by Fisher Stevens, which was viewed more than 60 million times across platforms. He addressed the United Nations Climate Summit in 2014 as a UN Messenger of Peace, a designation that carries institutional weight. His environmental positions have made him a target for certain media cycles, but they have also made him one of the few mainstream Hollywood figures whose advocacy is backed by a documented 25-year financial and institutional commitment, rather than a Twitter statement. He also produces. The production company he co-founded, Appian Way Productions, has shepherded films including The Aviator, The Departed, Inception, The Wolf of Wall Street, The Revenant, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Projects that collectively account for multiple Best Picture nominations and wins, and have influenced the visual and narrative language of American cinema in the streaming era. The producing credit matters because it means DiCaprio has skin in the creative and financial architecture of these films, not just the performance. He is not simply executing other people's visions. He is constructing the conditions under which those visions get made. Christopher Nolan's Inception, released in 2010, belongs in any serious accounting of DiCaprio's cultural footprint. As Dom Cobb, a thief who operates inside the architecture of dreams, DiCaprio anchored a film that required audiences to track nested layers of unreality while remaining emotionally invested in a man processing grief. The film grossed $836 million worldwide, won 4 Academy Awards, and generated a level of popular discourse about its ending, specifically the fate of the spinning top in the final frame, that persisted for years. Film scholars have written seriously about the way DiCaprio's grounded performance prevented the film's conceptual ambition from becoming cold or alienating. That is, the specific kind of contribution that does not show up in box office tallies, but shapes whether a difficult film connects with a broad audience. The numbers, when you line them up, are instructive. DiCaprio has appeared in films that have collectively grossed more than $7 billion worldwide. He has 4 Academy Award nominations for Best Actor alone, not counting his supporting actor nomination at 19. He has worked with a list of directors: Scorsese, Spielberg, Tarantino, Nolan, Iñárritu, Scott, Lasse Hallström, Sam Raimi, James Cameron, Steven Zaillian, that represents essentially the entire canon of serious American and international filmmaking over 30 years. The consistency of that access is itself a form of industry testimony. What is less discussed but equally important is the template DiCaprio created for how a bankable movie star can operate in the post-blockbuster landscape. He demonstrated that it is possible to maintain both commercial viability and artistic credibility by being extremely selective, by partnering with filmmakers who are themselves working at the edge of their abilities, and by resisting the gravitational pull of franchise work that turned many of his contemporaries into IP delivery systems. That model, patient, selective, partnership-based, has influenced how a generation of actors negotiate their own careers. Actors including Michael B. Jordan, Timothée Chalamet, and Adam Driver have all cited the importance of director relationships and project selectivity in interviews, and the DiCaprio precedent is visible in those choices. Killers of the Flower Moon, released in October 2023, is the most recent data point. In it, DiCaprio plays Ernest Burkhart, a morally compromised man who participates in the systematic murder of Osage Nation members for their oil wealth in 1920s Oklahoma, a character who is neither hero nor villain, but something more uncomfortable, a weak man who chooses complicity. The film is 3 hours and 26 minutes long, received an 8-minute standing ovation at Cannes, and was described by multiple critics as one of Scorsese's greatest achievements. DiCaprio's performance was widely noted for its refusal to provide the audience with easy judgment. He makes Burkhart pathetic and culpable simultaneously, and the discomfort that creates is intentional. At 49 years old, he was doing the most complex dramatic work of his career. There are filmmakers who still want to work with him for the first time. Denis Villeneuve, who has built one of the most respected bodies of work in contemporary cinema with Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, and the Dune films, has spoken publicly about his desire to collaborate with DiCaprio. Paul Thomas Anderson, whose films Boogie Nights and There Will Be Blood occupy the same register of American cinema that DiCaprio has consistently inhabited, is another name that circulates in that conversation. The fact that there are still significant first-time collaborations available to him is unusual for someone at his stage of a career, and suggests that the catalogue has not yet reached its ceiling. Leonardo DiCaprio is 50 years old. He has spent 33 years inside the machinery of Hollywood without becoming consumed by it. The legacy is already substantial enough to be taught, studied, and argued over. The performances are in the permanent record. The foundation work is funded and ongoing. The production slate is active. But the film that fully defines what this career meant, the one that sits at the top of the retrospectives decades from now, may not have been made yet. That is not a gap in the story. That is the story. A legacy that is still being written by a filmmaker-actor who has consistently chosen the harder path is more interesting than one that has already closed. The conversation about Leonardo DiCaprio is not finished. He is still in it.